Who are the best players in Jazz history? I'm going to create my ultimate Jazz squad and draft the best players in history with you guys here on Locked On Jazz.
You are Locked On Jazz, your daily podcast on the Utah Jazz.
Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Jazz Nation? Hello and welcome into Locked On Jazz. I'm Leif, and today I'll discuss the best players of all time on the Utah Jazz and build a dream team with one of those grids that's fun and says you got $15 budget to draft a team, and I got the graphic ready. I'm going to draft a great team. So let's dive right in. Let's rank out the top 5 players in history. And I think this is becoming more and more interesting over the years as Donovan Mitchell continues to ascend. Rudy Gobert racks up accolades. But I'm talking just Jazz tenure and how great they can be. So I'll rank out my top 10, give my rationale, because I think it's fun to appreciate the history as we've talked about previewing this season. But there's only so much we can do that's guesswork, you know. So let's talk about it and how quickly can Darren Peterson rise up these ranks. First player has got to be Karl Malone. I've always been a John Stockton fan. I'm a point guard by belief, but Karl Malone was at many times in his career one of the best players in the NBA altogether. Those two together, the differentiation I think is Karl Malone had MVPs, and if you look at Karl Malone in his greatest years, John Stockton made his job a lot easier. I really want to make that clear. But if you have to choose one that's better than the other, I think that the difference is just how great he was at finishing those plays. And yes, you can look at the second and all-time for when he finished his career, and then LeBron, of course, usurped him and Kareem. But he's third all-time points, 2-time MVP, and a 14-time All-Star, 11-time consecutive All-NBA first-team selection. And so he's, not consecutive first-team selection, but an 11-time All-NBA player. And he was consecutively voted for all of these awards in 11 straight years. Played on the Dream Team, of course. And if you were to look at career averages, John Stockton makes him look a lot better, but it's pretty hard not to choose Karl Malone. Number 2, of course, is John Stockton. And it's the same situation. Longevity, he's got the most unbreakable record, steals and assists. I don't think anyone's ever going to touch those. I've looked at the numbers, and I think there was something that was essentially when Chris Paul was in year 16 of his career. Year 16, and one of the greatest passers ever. It was like, well, if Chris Paul were to break this, he'd have to play 10 more years and average 10 more assists. So John Stockton's record's untouchable. Like, no one is ever going to get to John Stockton's record of the assists, and his longevity is hard to parallel. And the only player who really had the same consistent longevity is LeBron James. And LeBron James is the greatest player ever, in my opinion, but also the player who at the age he's been at. So when he was 39, he was the best 39-year-old. When he was 40, he was the best 40-year-old. When he was 41, best 41-year-old. When he was 18, he was the best 18-year-old. Like, LeBron's the best player ever, in my opinion. But the only player who's really had consistent parallels at, oh, that guy's great throughout his entire career, aside from maybe Timmy D, but he had a drop off, would be John Stockton. And I think people in Utah, of course, understand how great John Stockton was. People understand that he is amazing. But I don't think people understand from a national perspective how rare John Stockton's accolades are, because I don't think they're breakable. He also had amazing longevity with the Utah Jazz, which is something I factor in. 19-year NBA career, drafted from Gonzaga, goes to the Jazz, and he's there for 19 years and never switches teams. His all-time career assist record is at 15,806, and that's nearly 4,000 clear of the next closest player. So let's just do some simple math. Let's say someone averages 10 assists per game. They play all 82 games. Well, they're not even going to break that for another 5+ seasons. It's just absurd how amazing John Stockton's consistency as a passer was, how he operated, and also in steals, he's way ahead. He led the NBA in assists for 9 consecutive seasons. That's an unparalleled feat. And he was in many All-Star games, a multiple-time All-NBA selection, of course, 2-time first team, 6-time second team, 3-time third team. And defensively, very hard to parallel his feats there alone. So he, to me, has gone down in history as one of the more underrated players that people appreciate in knowing, oh, he was great, but he played for the Jazz. Like, what else is there? Yeah, he passed. He set up Malone. He has untouchable records. Okay, number 3 to me, I think, is where people are going to argue with me. I think that Rudy Gobert is the third best player in Jazz history. Rudy Gobert is a 4-time defensive player of the year, 3 times with the Utah Jazz, was the backbone of a defense. And I saw someone argue with me that he wasn't the only good defender. Mike Conley throughout his career has been a great defender. Like, I understand Mike was good with the Grizzlies. Mike was aging in an era with players needing to be bigger to be good defenders. And he and Donovan Mitchell were routinely dominated in defending. Like, Mike Conley, I adore. I think he's amazing. Was so happy we got him. Watched his first game here. I was like, Mountain Mike, this is going to be game changing. And then I watched the next year, and I was so happy for him, the All-Star. But Mike Conley was not a good defender for the Utah Jazz. Like, that's just a narrative thing. And so you weren't watching the games if you think Mike was a great defender. Secondly, Royce O'Neal was the second best defender on the Utah Jazz, but that doesn't mean he was a good defender. Anyway, that's a digression for another time, but let's talk Rudy Gobert. Rudy Gobert is definitely the third best player in Jazz history because he helped lead the Jazz to a 1 seed. And yes, the Jazz have playoff shortcomings, and he's usually the one to blame. I disagree with that notion to blame him because he was covering everyone else when they would get to the rim. But the matter of fact is he's a top 10 player for the Jazz in points, rebounds, blocks, games played, and minutes played. And then if you get into the analytics, he's an analytics darling. I think Rudy Gobert narrowly edges out my number 4, which is Deron Williams. And you're going to go, wait a minute. Deron didn't have more success than Donovan. Deron didn't do more than Pistol Pete or someone like that. But Deron Williams, in an era where the Western Conference was unbelievable, had the Jazz reaching the Western Conference Finals, had the Jazz routinely in the top 5. And yes, his career is going to be paralleled with Chris Paul. And I grew up watching this rivalry. And any given night, you may say Chris Paul had the better career, and you'd be correct. And you may have said it then and been like, oh, yeah, I think Chris Paul is going to be better. And you probably were right then. But that head-to-head matchup with Deron Williams dominated. And, like, I know your metric shouldn't be, oh, is he better than Chris Paul? But Chris Paul is the best point guard of a generation. He's also overly hated, and I think his career will be misunderstood down the road. But while the Jazz ended their relationship with Deron Williams in a sour fashion, 3 All-Star appearances, 2 All-NBA appearances, and a few MVP votes. Like, that's really hard to say in his years. Like, he left in 2011. He was drafted in 2005, didn't even start for most of 2005. And, I mean, in that 5 years where he was the dude, the Jazz were really good, and Deron Williams was the reason. He's a top 10 player on the team. So if you look at peaks, Stockton was a top 10 player, Malone was a top 10 player, and Gobert, it's interesting. You don't know if he would be a top 10 player, but in terms of impact, he was up there year in, year out. And Deron Williams elevated the Jazz to the top 10 teams in the NBA, and even better, making Western Conference Finals. And I would take Donovan as a very, very good player, but Deron led to more winning, and I think he was clearly the best player on his team, whereas I think Rudy Gobert was better than Donovan. Now, that leads me to Donovan Mitchell, who's my number 5. And you may say, wait a minute, we have this guy named Pete Maravich. Well, Pete Maravich, I think he's an interesting one to break down with the Utah Jazz. The Utah Jazz is a slightly different story than the New Orleans Jazz. And also, I think that he was an incredible player for the Utah Jazz, but I also think we're kind of like grasping at straws saying, oh, yeah, Pete did this with us and that with them and whatnot. If we aggregate it, Pete's ahead of Donovan. He's probably ahead of Deron, too. In fact, he definitely is ahead of Deron, too, and maybe ahead of Rudy. But Donovan Mitchell came into the Jazz, scored 20 a game as a rookie, and then was an all-star by year 3, and he was consistently putting the Jazz in the top of the NBA offensively, put forth amazing playoff performances, reinvigorated a franchise that really felt like they lost hope by being betrayed by Gordon Hayward leaving the franchise. The Jazz were great. Like, under Donovan and Rudy, they were awesome. Had shortcomings, sour ending. The fight, I wouldn't say a fight, but a split between those stars sours this. But the truth of the matter is, Donovan was awesome. And if you take an entire career, he probably has an entire career better than Deron Williams. But Deron Williams is the better Jazz man, in my opinion. Coming up next, I got 6 through 10 in my list, as well as, of course, that fun game where you got $15 in a 5x5 grid, and you got to choose who is going to be the best lineup the Jazz could ever assemble. All that and more ahead on Locked on Jazz. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. And sometimes you are looking for who's hitting a home run today. And so if you're a baseball fan like I am, you definitely are. And FanDuel is giving you a free chance to call your shot with daily dingers. It's easy to play. You just make your free pick for who you think will hit a home run in their game. If you're right, you'll receive a profit boost on that you need to use your next bet for a chance at extra winnings. Best of all, you can make a free pick every day throughout the MLB season. Daily Dingers is another way to stay engaged with every day's games. Whether you're following your favorite team or keeping an eye on the matchups across the league, every game is someone capable of going deep. Now you get the chance to make your prediction before first pitch. Sometimes the hitter has been on a hot streak, a favorable pitching matchup, or even a ballpark that tends to give up home runs. Those are always the first things I look at before making my Daily Dingers pick. So are you ready to play FanDuel? Are you ready to play your game today? Join all the action at FanDuel. That's FanDuel.com to play Daily Dingers and make your free pick on who's hitting a home run. Play ball and swing for the fences on FanDuel, the official partner of the MLB. I also want to tell you all about our friends at Intercap Lending. They're the best, one of the best and largest independent lending companies in the country. They are not only in Utah because they give you the impression that they're small because they take such great care of you. Nope, 44 states, not just in Utah, hyper responsive, embrace change, have grown throughout the years and gotten even better. And they have so many testimonials of excellent borrower experience. You can service your own loan, build long-term relationships, and they are better for the customer. Steve Carter is our own personal loan officer at Locked On Jazz, and you can tell him. You can reach out and say, I listen to Locked On Jazz. I want Steve Carter. So call him at 385-800-8528 and make sure to tell him you're a Locked On listener to get the corporate discount. Intercap Lending, NMLS number 190465. For more information, visit intercaplending.com. Welcome back to Locked On Jazz. Leif Tulane with you here. Thank you guys for tuning in for a live show. And hope you guys are enjoying a one that's a little less statistically inclined, just an opinion piece on the best players of all time that formed the history of our franchise. So number 6 is Pistol Pete Maravich. I think it's pretty hard to push him any further down. Of course, I like the idea of keeping it just to Jazz contributions, which I think hurts Donovan Mitchell's case. Donovan was amazing, one of the best draft picks the Jazz have ever made, but Pistol Pete over his career probably goes higher. Pistol Pete is a legend of basketball. I mean, if you guys want a statistic, he scored 44 points per game without three-pointers at LSU. Without three-pointers, he scored 44 points per game at LSU. He was an amazing player, wizard with the basketball, and I just think too much of his career was not with the Utah Jazz to rank him higher than where I have him on the Utah Jazz. So that's my number 6. And I would listen to arguments for those of you saying, okay, well, what about his New Orleans Jazz career? Where would he rank? And perhaps some of you actually saw him play as opposed to my, watching highlights, reading up on Pistol Pete, being a historian of the game. And you guys have an opinion that would sway me. But he's number 6 for me. Another one that I think overall in his career is an all-time great and maybe is disrespected as a player would be Adrian Dantley. He's number 7 for me. Adrian Dantley is a great player, played all over the place. And I think he's probably the easiest to overrate throughout this list. Underrate throughout this list. He during his 7-year tenure with the Jazz, scored 29 points per game, 6 rebounds, 4 assists, and he led the league in scoring twice, made 6 All-Star teams, 2 All-NBA teams, and received MVP votes multiple times. The Jazz, the issue here is, yes, those numbers are better than even Deron Williams. Probably better in a vacuum than Rudy Gobert. But the Jazz teams lost, and it lost a lot. And I think he's, despite being the all-time leader in Jazz points per game, even more than Karl Malone, I think winning is why I factor this in. The steady program of like Jerry Sloan, John Stockton, Karl Malone winning. That's amazing. You can't take that away from them. Now, the issue with how this ended up being ranked is I'm going off winning and contributions only with the Utah Jazz. Adrian Dantley goes higher if it's contributions as a career, and the Jazz had won at an equal rate. He and Pistol Pete are probably the 2 I'd listen to being snubbed. But let me know what you guys think on that one. Like, do you think I'm being overly harsh? But I think if you were to look at most Jazz fans making this list, I think I'm pretty close to most. Number 8 is really interesting because I think this is where it gets a little more hectic, and it's about opinion of winning or potential and stuff like that. So I'm going to go with Mark Eaton because the Jazz won the most in his tenure, and he was, by the way, rest in peace, anchor, won the Defensive Player of the Year twice, and he also was top three more times. He was the anchor that led the Jazz to the chance of winning the title twice, and he averaged, I wanted to make sure I'm right on this, 5.6 blocks per game in 1985. He also was third in games played and third in total rebounds for the Utah Jazz. And so, yeah, we're going to talk about players that maybe have more accolades, more points per game. But he defined a defensive era in which the Jazz were extremely successful. And I think you got to just give it up and stay consistent with winning. And a player that was vital to winning is going to stay up there in my rankings. So Mark Eaton, number 8. I'm going with Carlos Boozer at number 9. And it's interesting. I was never the biggest Boozer guy growing up. Never was. And he was great for much of it. He was on the Olympic team. And he averaged 19.3 points, 10.5 rebounds, and 2.9 assists in his 6-year stint with Utah. So we talked 6-year stints. We talked about Deron's. Well, Carlos Boozer had the same situation. And it earned him 2 All-Star appearances, an NBA, All-NBA third team, and he also had the 4th most double-doubles in franchise history, not to mention he was on the Olympic team. Like, if you're on the Olympic team, especially the ones that have been recent, you are an amazing player. But for some reason, Carlos never moved me the same way as some other players. And I almost put AK because I like him more. And I think AK could have been a better player. But realistically, if you talk about that era that I grew up watching, it's Deron's the best player and Carlos is number 2. So I think it would be disingenuous to not put him on this list ahead of Andrei Kirilenko. And that's who I'm going to round out the list with Andrei Kirilenko, one of my personal favorite players. I messed around and tried wearing a mohawk. I would try looking like AK. I still have my little kid AK jersey. One of my favorite players. I threw him an alley-oop. I was lucky enough to do so. And I love Andrei Kirilenko. I think the interesting part is his game would be so much more valuable today than it was when he played. And he's still one of the best players in Jazz history. He played 10 seasons, and his name is all over the leaderboard. 7th in games played, 5th in minutes played, 4th in free throws, 9th in rebounds, 6th in assists, 4th in steals, 2nd in blocks, 6th in points, 3rd in triple doubles, and so on. He's one of those guys you can just look at a stat sheet and be like, oh yeah, he made an impact. He made an impact. And I think the interesting part is as the career went on, it felt like his all-star stats became, oh, he's a really good role player. And I think that's a sign of a very unselfish player, one that is in to win. But you almost wish he would have extended that all-star form he had from early in his career, the 2003, 2004 years, in order to make the Jazz more of a true threat once they had Deron and Carlos. So I think you got to go with that order of those guys. There are plenty of other franchise legends. Just narrowly missing the cut was Jeff Hornacek for me. I think Lauri Markkanen's got a case. Of course, I'm hoping DP will get there. A player that maybe had a sour finish, but I think would be right there. And I actually would take probably over Lauri and probably over Hornacek would be Gordon Hayward. I think Gordon Hayward was great for the Utah Jazz. I think he led the Jazz to pretty high heights considering how that team was built. Gobert was great, but Gordon Hayward was the focal point, much like Donovan Mitchell. Career ended unceremoniously for us, at least. But those are the guys that are narrow misses. Now, coming up next, I'm going to draft an ultimate team, talking about all these guys, and kind of make one that fits the roster. We'll break that down next on Locked On Jazz.
The problem of finding clothes that you can live in all day, be comfortable, and do whatever you need to do, whether it's just chilling, going to meetings, playing golf, being on the move, that problem has been solved by Cozy Earth. The everyday polo is the answer. It's lightweight, built to move with you, just easy to wear everywhere. I've got it on right now, and it's fabulous. Plus, the Cozy Earth Essential Socks, they're exactly what the name suggests. Soft, supportive, comfortable enough that you stop thinking about them halfway through the day. Plus, Cozy Earth backs everything with a 10-year warranty and hassle-free returns. So if something isn't quite right, you're covered. That makes trying them for yourself an easy decision. I've got the Cozy Earth Everyday Polo in blue and in black. Check them out at CozyEarth.com. Use the code LOCKEDON for 20% off. That's right. Locked On for an exclusive 20% off. And if you see a post-purchase survey, please mention you heard about it right here, CozyEarth.com.
Welcome back to Locked On Jazz. Leif Tulin with you here, and we have been building the top 10 players. And so for a review, if you're just hopping on, I went Malone, Stockton, Gobert, Deron, and that's Deron Williams. Hopefully Darren Peterson can even jump higher. Donovan Mitchell is my top 5. Pete Maravich, Adrian Dantley at 7. Mark Eaton, Carlos Boozer, Andrei Kirilenko. That's my top 10. Now, if you guys are anything like me, you guys have seen those. Build your $15 Jazz team, and I'm building one right now. The game is essentially that there are $5 for the best players of all time. It's $4 for the second tier, 3 for the next, 2 for the next, and 1. And you go 5. You take one player from each row: the 5, the 4, the 3, the 2, and the 1. You also take one player at each position. And I think the way that this is set up, and I'll read it off to you. The top row is Deron Williams, Donovan Mitchell, Adrian Dantley, Karl Malone, and Rudy Gobert. So I think it's pretty clear. You take Karl Malone if you think he's the best player. So there's my 5. My $5 player. That's my 4, obviously. And then the player I'd like to take, of course, is John Stockton, but I'm going to play this more honestly and not go 5 and 5 and Jerry just kind of find my way through. The 4 to me has got to be Deron Williams. I mean, you could choose from Boozer, AK. You could look at Griffith. You could look at Mark Eaton, but I'm going Deron Williams. So I've got Karl Malone and Deron Williams, 2 players I think are in the top 4 in franchise history. And then I've spent my $9. Then at the $3 that is, I want to make this clear. The Pistol Pete Maravich in this graphic that I'm using is in the 3. I don't think that's a fair pick because I see him as a top 10 player in franchise history. So I'm actually not going to take Pistol Pete because I just don't think that's the way this should be built. So I'm going to go with Gordon Hayward over Lauri Markkanen and Mehmet Okur. I'm going to go with Gordon Hayward as my 3 and my $3. So far, I've got Karl Malone, Deron Williams, Gordon Hayward. And then I've got the $2 player. And I think there's a case. Of course, if Pistol Pete's there, you could go Pistol Pete, and then you shift some stuff. The $2 player, you got Mike Conley, Jeff Hornacek, Paul Millsap, Al Jefferson. And Paul Millsap was awesome. I loved him, but this is just his Jazz tenure. I want to be clear about that. So I think you got to go Jeff Hornacek in this because Al Jefferson doesn't help the Jazz in the same way you got Karl Malone operating the interior. You'd want a defensive center. So Eaton and Gobert would be players you could consider, and then you play, Conley as a 1 or Rubio as a 1, and you have your scoring from guys like Maravich or something like that. That's another thought. But I'm going to go with just who I think the best players are. I've got Karl Malone, Deron Williams. I'm going Gordon Hayward over Lauri Markkanen. I'm going to go with Jeff Hornacek over Millsap and Jefferson. Conley doesn't factor in because I've got Deron Williams. So now I've got Karl Malone and the people listening in here, and Mark Eaton is a $4 player, and I'm going to go Deron Williams over Mark Eaton. But like I just said, Mark Eaton next to Rudy Gobert next to Karl Malone would be an awesome fit, obviously. I just want my guy, Deron Williams. So I'm going Deron Williams, Karl Malone, Gordon Hayward, Jeff Hornacek. My offense is going to be great. And so I need a center. The $1 players are Ricky Rubio, Jordan Clarkson, the big dog, Thurl Bailey, and Greg Ostertag. So I need a center. That leaves me Greg Ostertag. Now, Ostertag, I think it's a bad reputation as not being particularly great. But early in his career, he was playing on the NBA Finals. So I'm going to go with Greg Ostertag. Now, I'll give you one alternate option of how I'd build this. That's my pick. I would go Karl Malone, Deron Williams, Gordon Hayward, Jeff Hornacek, and Greg Ostertag. I could, instead of Gordon Hayward, go Maravich, and I understand that's better. I just think that's kind of cheating the game with this. Okay, the other option would you go Karl Malone, Mark Eaton, Pistol Pete Maravich, because he's a 3. But once again, I think that's cheating the game a little bit. And then so he's your 2. You go Mike Conley at the 1, and then you need a wing, and you could go with Clarkson or something like that. I just like the way I built my team more. I think it's more ethically and more in the spirit of the game, as opposed to taking advantage of Pistol Pete being put too low on this list. Let me know what you guys think. Hopefully you guys enjoyed a little bit of a curveball edition of Locked On Jazz, in which we talked about stuff that doesn't really matter about ranking these guys out, but it's fun. We all love our Utah Jazz, and the Utah Jazz mean a ton to me, just like they do to you. And to me, those are the rankings of the best players ever. Would love to hear your thoughts on the best players ever on the Jazz, and who would you take? So thank you guys, as always, for tuning in to Locked On Jazz. With your second listen, check out Locked On NBA, where they've got ever-going coverage of the NBA, all the trade rumors, all the latest signings, who's going to be great in the NBA. They do an amazing job, Matt Hayes and the crew. So check them out on Locked On NBA. And thank you guys, as always, for tuning in to Locked On Jazz. Go Jazz.